This is an embroidery hoop. This is a pendant light I saw on Home Depot's website. My goal was to make a bunch of these into that. Many things will go wrong. I started by cutting down some of the embroidery hoops so that I have a 1/2 inch diameter difference between hoops. Or at least that was the goal. Turns out embroidery hoop sizes are not super standardized, so I got what I got. This is also kind of difficult. For obvious reasons, the hoops tend to want to shoot apart. I was seriously worried that they were going to pop off after everything is done, so I found some thin pieces of scrap oak left over from this lovely in-progress countertop, cut them down, and glued them to the joint to help stabilize it. Nothing's exploded yet, so this probably wasn't a total fail. Then I made some spacers. There are 2 ways to do this. The first is to buy a dowel rod, cut a bunch of small pieces on the bandsaw, then shatter them with the drill press while attempting to drill a large enough hole in the middle. Every 5 or so tries, you'll have something salvageable. The second way is to buy clear nylon washers off of Amazon. Do this one. I don't know why I didn't start with this. Either way, I've got links in the description for all of the supplies, as well as a link to the original light if you're smart enough to skip this project entirely. Finally, I made a base to cover the junction box in the ceiling. I foolishly decided that this should be a circle, which made my life way more difficult than it needed to be. I crafted a jig thing out of some plywood and a nail, which at least got me something vaguely circular, but I'm not sure I can say that it did a better job than I could have done freehand following the compass line. Turning my handheld belt sander into a benchtop belt sander to clean up the circle was one of my better ideas, and by that I mean I stole it from my dad. Worked like a charm though, and in the end I had a relatively round circle. Next, I tested the electrical setup, since the last thing I wanted was for something to go wrong while I was holding a painstakingly built, fragile pendant light 8 feet off the ground. I cut the plug and switch off a light cord I purchased on Amazon and exposed some wiring. Then I added some picture hanging wire to the base of the pendant light so that the weight of the light wouldn't be on the electrical connection. This was probably a waste of time though, because I'm fairly confident that the wire isn't actually taut in the final installation, but I tried. Then I turned off the circuit and connected everything, tying the picture wire to the top of the screw that holds the cover piece in place. I'm being vague here because I'm not an electrician and nobody ever should be taking electrical advice from me. Luckily, the light turned on, which was good because I had zero idea of what to do if it didn't. Then I kept working on the hoops. They were dry by this point, so mainly I just needed to add a hole for the cord to go through. The tricky thing here is that the cord required a 1/4 inch hole and the hoops were only 3/8 of an inch wide, so I needed to be rather precise with my drilling. Precise drilling screams drill press to me, but it took me about 5 seconds to realize that was not going to work. So instead, I built another jig thing to hold the hoop in place while I drilled and maybe help me drill more precisely in the center. I say maybe because I'm not actually sure that top part did anything, but it made me feel more confident, and that's all that really matters. Finally, I got to do the fun part of actually assembling the light. Stringing everything onto the cord went fast and made me feel really productive. Gluing it all together did not. But first, let's start with the win. MVP of the project goes to the air filtration system for providing the hanging location to glue together the light. Saved me 20 minutes of building another jig, and it would appreciate it if you hit the like button below in its honor. But the gluing. I tried a couple of different glues, but the main issue here is that there's no real way to clamp the wood. You have to hold the pieces in place until everything is dry, which even for fast drying glues isn't really achievable. So I grabbed a hot glue gun. Yes, I know, hot glue isn't particularly strong or permanent, but it dries almost instantly. You can hold everything in place for the 20 or so seconds it takes for the glue to cool, and then you're good to go. So that's what I did, and it worked perfectly. I originally thought I was going to put spacers on the bottom and glue everything together there as well, but after doing the top, I opted not to, mostly because it seemed difficult and I wasn't sure it'd actually look any better. In a different world where I was able to purchase hoops that were exactly the right size, I might have drilled another hole on the bottom of the hoops and placed a dowel through it to keep everything in line. But I placed all the joints on the bottom to help disguise them, so that section was fragile and really couldn't take another hole. I think it looks fine without it, but it would look slightly better if the joints weren't there and everything was perfectly aligned. So after all that, should we DIY or buy? Looks-wise, I'm betting that the purchase version looks slightly more professional, but I think mine looks pretty good too. Cost-wise, this totaled $55 for the spacers, pendant light, and embroidery hoops, compared to $260 at Home Depot. But the trade-off is time. I probably spent around 15 hours total working on the project, but that includes time wasted making spacers and trying different glues. If I could make it again, I could probably cut that in half. The real reason I'm going to say bye on this one is that it requires a fair amount of troubleshooting and general handiness. The embroidery hoops needed an extra support mechanism. 3 different times I needed to build a jig for the cut. The final product required an electrical hookup. This is a project for the determined, but luckily there's a link in the description to the original light if you love the look but don't want the work. And if you want a project that's a bit more straightforward, this cat bed is super cute, so go check it out. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.